Okay, colleagues, good morning. My name's Richard Taylor. I'm from the University of Leicester, and I'd like to welcome you here to the City of Leicester to hear an update on the university's search for Richard III. This search has at times resembled something out of a Dan Brown novel in terms of its twists and turns, but hopefully today we're going to bring you right up to speed with the progress that the university has made. I'd like to start, though, by turning to Sir Peter Soulsby, City Mayor of Leicester, who would like to say a few words before we commence.
Thank you, Richard. I'd like to welcome you all here to Leicester's Guildhall, which has for centuries been the seat of the city's mayor and council. I think Leicester has, as many will know, been at the heart of English history for over 2,000 years. We've got the remains of the Roman baths, the Norman castle motte. We've got the wonderful church of St Mary de Castro, where Geoffrey Chaucer was married. And, of course, the magnificent Castle Hall, the home of the Dukes of Lancaster, with John o' Gaunt's cellar beneath it. And, of course, what brings us here today are the events of August 1485, when King Richard, who'd frequently visited the city, rode out from the town to Bosworth, only, of course, to be brought back on the back of a pack horse days later by the victorious Henry Tudor, and for Henry Tudor to ride in triumph through the city. I want just briefly to thank all who've been involved in this dig. Very grateful to the skills and enthusiasm of the University of Leicester Archaeology Department, the Richard III Society, in particular Philippa Langley, who's been such an enthusiastic spur to us getting on with this dig. And of course, finally, our thanks to our social workers, because our social workers have had to do without their car park. And in the light of what you're about to hear, it sounds like they might have to do without their car park for a little bit longer. Richard.
Thank you, Peter. I'd like to turn now to Richard Buckley from the University of Leicester, who's been the lead archaeologist on this search. It's very important that Richard talks you through the geography of the Greyfriars site so that you can understand what comes next. Richard.
Thanks, Richard. Faced with the prospect of looking for a lost Franciscan friary in the middle of a sort of urban area like this, it's very difficult indeed to know how to approach it because only small areas are actually available for investigation. So in this instance, we started by looking at the map evidence which homed in on where the Greyfriars stood. But then within the Greyfriars, there were any number of places that there could be the church, the cloisters, the chapter house, and all the other buildings. So I'm going to show you a plan to show you how the story really unfolded. We tried ground probing radar initially in the hope that we could do remote sensing and find the remains without initially digging lots of holes and ruining all these car parks. But the technique is very difficult to interpret the results because Leicester's archaeology is exceptionally deep and goes right back to the Iron Age, and there are many sort of complexities to it. So that technique was very good in helping us locate the trenches to avoid damaging modern services there, I have to say that. But the strategy really was to take the available area in the main car park and to dig initially two very long trenches with the aim of picking up east-west walls which may have belonged to some of the key friary buildings. At that stage I didn't really have any great high hopes that we would actually hit the right place because it was a very small area within what's a very large precinct. But what happened initially was that the two trenches through the middle of the social services car park revealed evidence of a high status building. So in particular down here we have a pair of walls, both of which have been robbed of their stone, one more than the other, and between them an area of tiled flooring laid diagonally. And because these walls were only 2 metres wide, 2 metres apart, it meant that it was almost certainly a cloister walk surrounding an open space or a cloister garth. At that stage we weren't really sure which side of the cloister walk the garth was. It could have been this side or it could have been this side. So the key discovery then really was to find a pair of walls in the next trench running east-west, each of which was robbed of its stone but which then had on the inside what looked like a little masonry bench, which immediately suggested it was a place for meetings and therefore probably the chapter house. And so that then identified this as the eastern cloister walk, which on a typical Greyfriars type of site, the cloister walk would then lead up to the middle part of the church, the walking place beneath a central tower. At that stage, the church could still have been at the southern end rather than the northern end. But the trench also revealed a pair of walls running this way, again robbed, but very substantial, about 7.5 metres apart, indicating a very major building running across this part of the site. To test those walls, we then did further investigations in a neighbouring car park that revealed these walls coming through, also areas of mortar floor between them, with tile impressions, this time running longitudinally. We also found a division in this area suggesting a change from this part of the church, by this time we were pretty sure it was the church, and an area which was on this side to the east, where tiles were laid diagonally. And so we were thinking at that stage that maybe we were on the trail of where the choir of the church was, where the burial of Richard III is said to have been in historical sources. We also found some evidence potentially for choir stall bases, and also some very massive architectural fragments right from the very end of the trench, which is probably the east window of the church. Whilst all of this was coming together, we were investigating some human remains in this area on the other side of a wall that divides the site. Again, there were no great high hopes that these were the remains we were looking for, but the story then began to unfold as the human osteologist exhumed the remains. And so the position of that burial is probably at the very beginning of the choir, on the basis that the walking place is here and there's a tower here. You would walk through a screen or a wall, and the first thing you would have been standing on would have been this burial. So it's in a very prime spot within the Church of the Greyfriars. And at that point, I'm going to stop and hand over for more information.
Thank you, Richard. I'd like now to just read out a statement which carefully sketches out the university's position on where we have reached. So, on Friday, the 31st of August 2012, the University of Leicester applied to the Ministry of Justice under the 1857 Burials Act for permission to commence the exhumation of human remains found at the Greyfriars site in Leicester. Exhumation commenced on Tuesday, the 4th of September 2012, and has continued right through to this morning. The work was conducted by Dr. Turi King from the University of Leicester's Department of Genetics, Dr. Joe Appleby, and Matthew Morris from our School of Archaeology and Ancient History. We have exhumed one fully articulated skeleton and one set of disarticulated human remains. The disarticulated set of human remains was found in what is believed to be the presbytery of the lost Church of the Greyfriars, and these remains are female and therefore certainly not Richard III. The articulated skeleton, as Richard has explained, was found in what is believed to be the choir of the church. The articulated skeleton found in the choir of the church is of significant interest to us, and Dr. Joe Appleby has carried out a preliminary examination of the remains. And there are 5 reasons for our interest. 1. The remains are in good condition and appear to be of an adult male. 2. The choir is the area reported in the historical record as the burial place of King Richard III. John Rouse reports that Richard was at last buried in the choir of the Friars Minor at Leicester. 3. The skeleton on initial examination appears to have suffered significant perimortem trauma, so near-death trauma, to the skull, which appears to be consistent, although is not certainly caused by, an injury received in battle. A bladed implement appears to have cleaved part of the rear of the skull. 4. A barbed metal arrowhead was found between the vertebrae of the skeleton's upper back. And 5. The skeleton found in the choir has spinal abnormalities. We believe that the individual would have had severe scoliosis, which is a form of spinal curvature. This would have made his right shoulder appear visibly higher than his left shoulder. And this is consistent with contemporary accounts of Richard's appearance. The skeleton does not have kyphosis, a different form of spinal curvature, and the skeleton was therefore not a hunchback. Both sets of remains are now at an undisclosed location where further analysis is being undertaken. I need to be really frank with you that the university has always been clear that any remains would need to be subjected to rigorous laboratory analysis before we confirm the outcome of the search for Richard III. We are not saying today that we have found King Richard III. What we are saying is that the search for Richard III has entered a new phase. Our focus is shifting from the archaeological excavation to laboratory analysis. This skeleton certainly has characteristics that warrant extensive, further detailed examination. Dr. Joe Appleby is undertaking further work to examine the remains, and Dr. Turi King from our Department of Genetics will lead the laboratory analysis. The results of this analysis are expected to take up to 12 weeks. I should emphasise that all human remains found at the site are being treated in full accordance with the University of Leicester's ethical policy for dealing with human remains. Clearly, we are all very excited by these latest discoveries. We have said that finding Richard was a long shot. However, it is a testament to the skill of the University of Leicester's archaeological team, led by Richard Buckley, that such extensive progress has been made. We have all been witness to a powerful and historic story unfolding before our eyes. It is proper that the university now subjects the findings to rigorous analysis so that the strong circumstantial evidence that has presented itself can be properly understood. This is potentially a historic moment for the university and the city of Leicester. I'm now going to turn to my colleagues for comment before I move to Q&A from the audience. And if I can turn first of all to Professor Lynn Foxhall, Head of the University's School of Archaeology and Ancient History. Lynn.
Right, thank you, Richard. Well, as academics, we deal in factual data, and today we're presenting what are archaeological facts, the archaeological facts as we see them at present. And as Richard said, a great deal of research and further investigation remains to be done before we can be sure of the identification of this individual. We may never be entirely certain. It's very, very difficult for archaeologists to identify individuals. But on the basis of the data we have so far, the archaeological context, the osteological, that is the skeletal evidence, we have a man with what appear to be battle injuries who suffered from severe scoliosis, that is curvature of the spine, respectfully but modestly buried in a place of honour in a friary church. And this does appear to be consistent with some of the meagre textual evidence about Richard III from contemporary historical sources. But it doesn't fit the exaggerated picture painted by later Tudor sources which portray him as a wicked hunchback. Now, there was a long history from Greco-Roman times onward of associating disability with negative character traits, a belief that we emphatically do not share today, although it does partially explain the later Tudor representation of Richard III. The individual we have discovered was plainly strong and active despite his disability, and indeed it seems a strong possibility that he died in battle. If this person does indeed turn out to be Richard III, and that is totally uncertain at the moment, there is the potential for a new and different understanding of the fate of the last of the Plantagenet kings. And I'd like to highlight now the meticulous work of the University of Leicester Archaeological Services and the scientific team, and to congratulate them on a brilliantly executed archaeological project. And to thank our other partners, because the work would not have been possible without the support of the University of Leicester overall, the Leicester City Council, the determination of Philippa Langley and the support of the Richard III Society. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Lynn. If I can now turn to Philippa Langley from the Richard III Society. Philippa?
I think most people in this room know that I had a dream, and that dream was to search for King Richard III, to try to find him. Today it seems that that dream may now be possible. I think what I would like to say is to anybody watching this or to anybody listening to this, if you have a dream, fight for it. But more than that, instill in others your belief and your passion, and by doing that you'll create a team. And I think what I'd like to do today is to thank the amazing team that's been behind this search for the last 3 weeks. But in particular, I'd like to thank Richard Buckley, one of the UK's leading archaeologists, for going on this unique journey with me.
Thank you, Philippa.
Thank you.
Thank you, Philippa. Sir Peter?
Well, clearly what we have here is something that is a major chapter in the history of England and a major chapter in the history of this great city. I am now determined that we should continue to support the work of the University Archaeological Department as they continue to look at the site, take their advice as to how they want to excavate further and to facilitate whatever they may want to do beyond what's already been done on that site, and also do all we can to enable visitors to see the site, to understand its context and the history of which it's a part, and to ensure that we share with them this aspect of our shared history, and indeed make sure that they have the opportunity to share the rest of the history of our land and our proud city.
Thank you, Peter. Finally on the panel, I'd like to turn to Dr. Turi King from the university's Department of Genetics. He'll just say a brief word on what the next steps are from this point onwards. Turi.
Right, so obviously the next stages are to do the DNA analysis, and what we will be doing in the first instance is attempting to get out ancient DNA from the skeletal material. What we're hoping to look at is mitochondrial DNA, and this is perfect for this particular case for 2 reasons. First of all, in ancient specimens, the most likely bit of DNA that's going to survive is mitochondrial DNA. And also, we have got a female line relative. So mitochondrial DNA is passed down through the female line. We have a female line relative in the form of Michael Ibsen. He is the 17th generation great-nephew of Richard III, and what we will be hoping to do will be to extract mitochondrial DNA from the skeleton and compare it with that of Michael Ibsen and look for a match. And that's our next steps.
Thank you. I'll move to Q&A in just one moment. I'd just like to say that colleagues from the university, from our School of English, our 16th century and 17th century literary scholars are here today, the archaeology team are here today, and colleagues from our School of Historical Studies. So there's opportunity after this point to speak with those, if that is helpful. In terms of the images today, we are not making available, for obvious reasons, images of human remains. That would be inappropriate. What we have and we'll make available through our Dropbox account for the media is a copy of the plan of the Greyfriars. We also have some drawings that have been prepared by Emma Vicelli, a graphic artist, which seeks to retell the story of Richard III and the subsequent search for him. And colleagues will now make those available at the back, and you can catch sight of those in a moment. I'd like to move now, though, to Q&A from colleagues from the audience. If you could say who you are and where you're from, that would be very helpful. Questions?
University of Leicester Mercury. When did you actually find it? Or them, should I say?
It might be better to say when we started the exhumation, I think, rather than when we found it. And I think it would be right to say that was
Tuesday the 4th of September.
Tuesday the 4th of September.
Lisa then from Sky News. Is the relative here of Richard III that you're going to extract?
No.
No, he's not. No. Michael's not here today.
Is he from Canada? Is that right? Can you give us a bit more? Can you give us a bit more detail about how you traced him, for example?
He's a British Canadian. His family were from Britain, but they moved to Canada. I think he was born in London, in Ontario.
No, well, he was born. His mother was born in England and then emigrated to Canada. He was born in Canada, came over here for a short stay and ended up staying. And he was tracked down. Well, rather, his mother was tracked down by John Ashdown Hill, a historian who was able to trace the genealogy down through the female line.
Anthony Barker from BBC News. You say that this has moved on to a different stage from the archaeology to laboratory analysis, but what are your plans for this amazing archaeology that you have found? Trenches, what's going to happen to them?
The thing about Leicester archaeology, in common with many urban centres, is that usually the remains are not that well preserved. So, for example, I mentioned walls and things that relate to the friary. Most of them have had all their stone robbed away, so all you get is the line of the wall where it used to be, backfilled with rubble. The floors have all been robbed of their tiles, but we get the impressions of tiles. So the site is not really a site that could be excavated thoroughly and preserved for people to see. It's not sufficient quality. And that's typical of Leicester sites, because Leicester has constantly recycled its building materials over the decades, over the centuries. So it's very rare to find an upstanding wall of the Roman or medieval period.
Okay, can I come back on that one as well?
Okay.
The other thing too is that, of course, with any archaeological remains that we find, human remains or otherwise, getting them out of the ground is only the first step. The next thing is that things need to be cleaned up, they need to be examined and studied closely, and you don't do this overnight, this takes a while. There are various kinds of scientific testing that we can subject them to, non-destructive, I hasten to add, and all kinds of examinations, ways of looking at these things, ways of studying them. So we have a range of techniques that we can apply, scientific techniques and just plain hard graft study. And Joe Appleby, will be responsible for the initial investigations of the skeletal material itself. But there are other things that we will look at too. And so this is where the laboratory analysis takes off. And most of that will happen at the University of Leicester, where we have the facilities for this.
So are you likely to fill in these trenches eventually?
I think Peter.
I'm going to take the advice of the university as to whether we need it to fill them in order to preserve them, as it were. I'm very determined that we should enable people of Leicester and visitors to Leicester to share in the experience of what has been found underground, and also to find, to see the artefacts and to understand them in their context. Whether that is by looking down into a trench, I think it's probably going to be by seeing them on display in an appropriate place very near to where those trenches have been dug.
So social services are likely to get their car, aren't they?
Not immediately. I have already explained this to the social workers.
Colleague at the back.
For Richard Buckley, Sean Mountain from Global TV News Canada. So I understand that you have to subject this to all the scientific rigor, but you found the bones, the skeleton, where you thought you would find it. Someone with scoliosis of the spine, with battle injuries. You must think you found it.
It's a very good candidate. Now, what I would
say so. I think we have.
I would say it's a prime candidate, certainly, and I think I'd be quite surprised if there were other people buried in the church who had these coincidental injuries. But it is to be subject to further analysis, as people have said on the panel.
Could I just ask it on the scale of archaeological? It must feel like you've really hit the jackpot.
I think the key point there is the university has always said that whatever is found needed to be subjected to rigorous laboratory analysis before we are prepared to commit. And I think that's where we are. There is clearly strong circumstantial evidence.
Nick Britton, Daily Telegraph. What is it you're now looking for that will confirm your suspicions?
Well,
DNA.
there's obviously the DNA evidence. So as I say, I mean, at the moment we don't know whether or not we'll be able to get DNA out of it, but we're looking to see whether or not there is a match with a known relative.
How long is this likely to take?
Okay, so the DNA analysis will take anything up to 12 weeks. Quick question here.
Greg Watson, BBC News. If you have it confirmed that it's Richard III, what are you going to do with him?
Should I say that? Yes, well, Richard's body has laid within the parish of what is now St Martin's Cathedral for 500 years. And I think it is appropriate and respectful for him to continue to lay within that parish. There is already a memorial stone in the cathedral. There's been some initial discussions with the cathedral authorities, and I certainly believe, and I think others will accept this, that that's the appropriate place for the remains to be reinterred.
Rupert Even from ITV News. You're effectively saying definitely maybe, aren't you? You're kind of, that's where you're going with this. Now, if the DNA doesn't deliver the result that you require, can any of the other tests make it definitive?
I think they'll never make it completely definitive. We may be able to say very, very likely, but unless we have DNA results, the osteology is never going to produce more than the fact that this matches all the characteristics that we know of about King Richard III.
And how likely is that then that the DNA, given the fact the body is so old, that match can be found? Is it achievable?
I'm hopeful. As I say, the analysis...
That's a sort of definitely maybe.
We haven't started the analysis, so that's the next steps. And as I say, the next thing is to see whether or not we can get DNA out of it that's in good quality.
Question here.
That's it from Leicester Guildhall. Were there any other artefacts found with the body or on the arrowhead?
No.
Yes, there were.
Oh, apart from, a fragment of an artefact, yes.
There was a very small fragment of a glass rod found in with it, but we haven't been able to identify that definitively yet.
This text that led you to explore this particular catalogue, does it give us any other clues about Richard which we should now take more seriously?
You're talking about... That would be a question for some of our medieval scholars, I think. I don't know, Philippa, do you want to...
I think, yes, I think what's going to happen now is, depending on the results of the analysis and investigation, I think medieval historians in particular are going to revisit all of the sources that we have for Richard III, because potentially it does change everything in terms of study of the real Richard III, not the Tudor myth.
Richard, what's the initial assessment about the arrowhead?
Shall I say
Yeah,
that?
go on.
Okay. All we know at the moment is that it's a barbed arrowhead, and we can't really say any more than that. Again, we've only just found it. These things have been out of the ground for 5 minutes, so there's much, much more analysis and investigation to be done. And as certainly all of us who are professional archaeologists know, archaeology is the science of uncertainty. We can almost never be 100% certain of everything. And the answer to how many archaeologists it takes to change a light bulb is we don't know, we don't have enough evidence.
Could you just explain just a bit more about the barbed arrowhead and it was found, was it in the back?
Yeah.
It was near the spine. It was, in fact, between two vertebrae, but not embedded in the bone. So we can't be sure whether it was just in the body or whether it was like where precisely it was in the body. I mean, the problem is that with a barbed arrowhead, once it's in, of course, like a fish hook, it's very difficult to get out. So at the moment, we don't know any more than that. And again, without much more detailed analysis of the skeletal material, we just can't be sure.
So other than the exaggerated account of the hunchback, is there anything else you found to kind of chime with other historical accounts of Richard III, of how he died, for example?
We don't know enough.
He died in battle.
Yeah.
He died in battle.
Yeah, he died. This is it. Yeah, he died in battle. I mean, the arrowhead is very suggestive that this is a death in battle, along with Joe, the head injury. Yes.
There are a couple of injuries to the head. It's possible also we haven't cleaned up the skull fully yet. So it's possible that when we get it cleaned up, we'll be able to see more detail of injuries suffered and then to understand more about it.
The other piece of information is if you look at the plan that Richard's produced, you can see a little mark near where it says walking place, which is at the entrance to the choir of the church, and that's where these remains were found. And I think Richard, I don't want to put words in Richard's mouth, but that would be a high status place. It's where John Rouse said Richard would be.
From what you were just talking about in terms of the injuries he received, and from what you've seen, what's the more likely to have killed him, the head injury or the arrow?
We don't know.
We can't say. Unfortunately, you see, we only have the skeletal remains, and there's nothing about a head injury that tells us that it turned up before or after an arrow. So that's actually a question we'll probably never be able to answer, I'm afraid.
There's only one source for how Richard died in battle, and it's been a source that up until now has been pretty much discredited. And it's a ballad called the Ballad of Bosworth Field, which was written quite some time after the battle. And in that it says that he was poleaxed in the head, I think by a chap called William Gardner, a Welshman. That's the only source we have.
Did you find any evidence of an alabaster tomb buried like that?
No, in fact the burial place was in a very unprepossessing spot where the floor levels of the building had been destroyed. There was lots of disturbance from modern foundations from the 19th century. So just a sort of very simple grave cut.
Can I ask Philippa Langley, you mentioned how this might change everything in our views of Richard III. How so? Do you think he'll lose his reputation as a villain somehow from all this?
Well, I think the whole reason for this journey and the whole reason for the search for the remains of Richard III was always to get to the real man, not the Tudor myth. And I think it was always about truth. And I think when you look at the historic record and when you read about Richard III, the real man, he's a man of good reputation and a king of good laws. And I think what comes across very clearly as what was important to him at the end of the day was truth in his own lifetime. And I think for me, if Richard was in this room with us now, he'd be just saying, get the truth. Get the truth. Because I think with the truth, I think he may then be able to finally rest in peace.
Do you think he's a victim of history being written by the winners?
Yeah, I do. Clearly, potentially the hunchback thing has been something that's been exaggerated, and yeah, for sure, the victors always write the history. And I think what we need to do is we need to go back and reassess Richard properly and look at his life from birth to the age of 30. In those years, it's very clearly documented who this man was. It's only when the Tudors get to him at the age of sort of 30, 31, when he takes the throne, that his character changes virtually overnight. So what I would say is let's look at the real man up to the age of 30 before the Tudors get to him, and let's assess him from there.
I'd agree with some of that. I'd say from the University of Leicester's perspective, I mean, we are not advocates for Richard III. We have not come into this process to change history or to rewrite the story of Richard III. We are led by the facts in front of us, and as you heard from my colleagues, that there's some interesting facts there out on the table.
Can I say something on that? Yes, I mean, the other problem, again, for us as archaeologists is that, of course, the archaeology tells you nothing about somebody's character. We can tell you lots about the individual as a body, as a person. We can tell you about artifacts. We can tell you about sometimes how people lived and died. But we can't tell you about character. That's beyond our remit.
On that point, so I was just going to ask that. How will potentially finding his body help you look at what you consider to be rewritten history? I can't see the marriage to.
You can't see the connect. I think it's in terms of Richard's story. We never really had a conclusion to it. We only had a conclusion from pretty much the Tudor writers telling us what happened. And it's not that we disbelieve what they say, we don't, but it's kind of wanting to really join up the dots so that we can see potentially how he died in battle, his last moments, potentially, you know, what brought him to the Greyfriars, what the Greyfriars was like, what their day-to-day living was like, how he was buried, why he was buried the way he was. There is so much that we can now add to Richard's story that I feel that we can now potentially give it some kind of conclusion.
Okay, well, thank you for coming along today. Colleagues from the table and other colleagues from the university and the cathedral are available if you wish to speak to us. We also have Emma's drawings at the back, and we'll make these available through our Dropbox account for you. And 12 o'clock we'll move across to the dig if you want to get some footage across there. Thank you very much for coming along today, and thank you to my colleagues here.